Hello everyone, welcome to the final Decades list video presenting to you my top 100 albums of the 2010s. Unlike with the previous list video where I talked about my 100 favorite songs of the 2010s, this is going to be separated in two parts because unlike the previous video where I went into a rapid fire mode, I don't want to do the same with this one. I just want to give a bit more time just talking about these albums just a little bit. And unlike the previous video, this is not going to be one album per artist, but it's not going to be a really unbalanced situation regardless. It's just that I think that certain artists have more than one good album, and just one album being placed in the list does not particularly give the massive appeal of an artist because they might have lots of different works that go into lots of different directions, and so it would be a bit of a shame to just have one album and just disregard just another work. The list is not going to contain compilations or archivals or TV soundtracks. And with that being said, let's just start. At number 100, introducing you to one of my favorite punk albums in this decade, which is Dirty Squats and Disco Lights by Totenwald. This is an album that I wouldn't expect I would like as much as I did, because it's a genre that I enjoy, but not to that much of an extent. And I think that this one has a great combination of pop punk with some very nice elements to it. It has female vocals, it has saxophone beats, it has drum machine, but even though it doesn't sound like that much of a good thing, the result is actually really good, and the whole aesthetic, the lyrical content and the performances from the band are absolutely stellar, and in my opinion they have some of the better ideas I've heard in an album of this category. So definitely check this one out if you want a bit of a more punk/post-punk experience. I think this is a very good album. At number 99 we have the brand new album from Sidewalks and Skeletons, Entity, that he released the previous year, and it has easily become one of my favorite works when it comes to Witch House, mainly because Sidewalks and Skeletons once again manages to present this genre in his own way, and just presenting his more aggressive work that really works very good in this particular genre. And one of the things that has also helped is the great vocals from Go Monday, which are in almost the entirety of the album. Yeah, this album is really impressive, especially for Witch House standards. It has really nice production to it, really nice sounds, and it's a very nice balance of both aggressive and just beautiful smooth sounds. Number 98 is the big comeback of House Arafna with the album You, which they released in 2010. And this is a bit of a different direction that we see from House Arafna, mainly known for going more into a very nice power electronic sound back in the 90s, but in this album they seem to go into a very dark wave direction that no other artist I've seen approaching the genre the way they do. I mean, they've already done it with their projects as November Novelette, but in this album in particular, the whole melody and the whole aesthetic of this album is just really dark and out there, while also maintaining some of their power electronics moments and making for a very, very good result. At number 97, it is the album that Blank Mass released the previous year, Animated Violence Mild. Once again, Blank Mass just proves why he is one of the better electronic and industrial musicians out there. There's not something that unique or that fresh to his sound that would make it stand out compared to some of his previous works, and including those that he did as the one half of Fuck Buttons. But the thing is that still he manages to create some incredible works that combine beauty and aggression in a way that only Blank Mass manages to approach the way he does. So this is another truly exceptional and very well crafted work. Number 96 is This Fog That Never Ends by Hunter. This is a darkwave album from one of the two members of the project Minute Machine, so if you have heard stuff from Minute Machine or from other sort of darkwave projects, recent ones that go more into like the 80s aesthetic, I think you can definitely dig this one. Does this album make something different to the genre? Is something like sort of revolutionary? No, but you still get some really great, really melancholic and beautiful ideas that are presented very, very well in this album. Number 95 is Maya by MIA, released in 2010. This is an album that has really grown on me since when I first heard it. And I would say that this album is very ahead of its time, considering how much it reflects on digital day and age, not only with its context and its lyricism, but also musically. This album has ideas that for its time they would just sound silly and for something to laugh at, but we see they end up being more of the norm nowadays, and this album is really underappreciated for that reason. And it is easily also one of the most diverse albums I've heard, especially in this kind of genre, because it's not just a pop album, it is mostly an electronic album, and it also has elements towards the second half where it goes into a more aggressive punk rock direction. This album is all over the place and for very good reasons. I think it is a really versatile album. It is way ahead of its time with his sonic representation, and yeah, also a highly underrated work from MIA and easily my favorite project from her. Number 94, I have one of the most unique and one of the most innovative hip-hop albums ever made, in my opinion, and that is There Existed an Addiction to Blood by Clipping. This is easily their darkest work so far, and this one goes more into a horrorcore direction, not just with the lyrical content and the context of the album, but also sonically. And it makes for a really varied and very well done album. The production to this really makes you like you're into a sadistic horror movie just for how immersive it manages to be, with how detailed and crisp everything sounds. The lyrics and the whole context is very well done and deeply explored, and it also contains some of the better features I've ever seen in a hip hop album. Just the way they have put so many of these features, it really makes for a unique experience that you don't easily get with albums like this. Number 93, I have Bad Witch by 9 Inch Nails. This has managed to become one of my favorite 9 Inch Nails projects, like all time period. I think what Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross have done with this album is something that we haven't heard that much, not only from the sound of 9 Inch Nails, but in general. It is a really well done album, and I like how it's just 30 minutes, 6 tracks, and it's all straight to the point. It is an easy, simple album to just put and relax. It is a really, really good work from the band. At number 92, I have Light That Comes, Light That Goes by Ensemble Economic. In my opinion, Ensemble Economic is one of the more underrated artists that I have discovered through the previous decade. I think he has lots of great works with such beautiful ambience that at times can be really majestic, other times more dark, and he has done lots of great works in my opinion, with this one being one of his better ones. Number 91, I have the incredible Hecatomb by Funeral Mist. Funeral Mist is a Christian black metal project that has managed to be very consistent with their discography. Anything they have put out so far, they have gotten some really good critics, but this one, in my opinion, is possibly their best work so far. This one really managed, out of everything Funeral Mist have done, to really click with me. And the more I listen to it, I just love its aggression. I love how ridiculous it is. It is very nasty, it is raw, it is insane. And for all of those reasons, it has become one of my favorite black metal projects of this decade. Number 90, I have The World from Croatian Amor. I really dig the older works from Croatian Amor. I really dig this older style that was just a really haunting, minimal ambient direction that would just work really well. The simplicity to his past works, including The World, made his projects spectacular and really amazing to just sit through and listen to them. Beautiful work from Croatian Amor. I'm really in love with this album. Number 89 is Ghost Brigades for One with a Storm. Now, I'm not a huge fan of death doom metal. I wouldn't say that I have the biggest experience with this genre, but this album has really managed to just click with me. It's that particular album that manages to get me through a genre, and this is what happened with Ghost Brigade. I have this album on a really great box set that contains a double LP, a bonus 7-inch, and it also had a poster and a slip mat, and I got it in a very good price, and I didn't regret it. The more I listen to this album, the more I just love the atmosphere to this and how beautiful it is, and especially in terms of production, this album is impressive. I really love the crisp crystal sound of this thing, and performance wise, great drums, great riffs, great vocals, both growls and clean ones. Yeah, this is a very solid work, and I definitely recommend this to you, especially if you're fans of like Catatonia and stuff like this. This is a very good death doom metal album in my opinion. Number 88, I have another album from Ensemble Economic, Radiate Through You. After all of the albums he has done so far, and he has done like lots of albums, I think this is my favorite one so far. This is a very good, really short album, only containing 5 tracks. It is a very beautiful experience containing more like ambient and neoclassical elements to this one in particular, and it's a very beautiful album to just relax, sit through and just enjoy this majestic experience. Number 87, it is Kontsuki by Merzbow. Merzbow, once again, this decade he has done lots of albums, but I wouldn't say that 2010s was like his decade or something. He went more into just making more collab stuff, going more into phases of avant-garde jazz or drone metal, and that's fine, but having to pick a Merzbow album from this decade, this is my favorite one so far. Like, out of everything I've heard from him releasing this decade, this is a truly exceptional work. I like how rhythmic this one is. It still contains the aggressive nature and the harsh noise stuff that you would expect from a Merzbow work, but he ties it so well with some of the more like rhythmic, sort of trance, aggressive and fast-paced scenes that are surrounded throughout the entirety of the 4 lengthy tracks over here. And it goes back more to the works he would do with some of his Merz series back in the 2000s. And yeah, this is a very solid work from Merzbow and a very good harsh noise project. Number 86, Songs by Roscoe. Roscoe is an underrated dubstep figure in my opinion. When it comes to this whole genre, I haven't seen that many people talk about him, and I think he's done some of the better works in this entire genre. Now granted, his second album goes more into a reggae-oriented direction, but in general this album is a bit all over the place. I mean, you have works that are more reminiscent of dance pop, there are acid house moments, it's a bit all over the place, but there are still so many great highlights to this album that even with some duds here and there in the whole track list, I still think this album still holds up, having some of the better dance moments like ever in this decade. Number 86, it is Taboo by Denzel Curry. An album that has definitely also grown with me. The more I listen to it, the more I'm just into the position saying that this is definitely one of the most consistent hip hop projects that have been out in recent years. And it's also a great trap album that also fuses lots of other moods and genres to it, like R&B for example and soul music, and it's all done in a very pleasant way that I wouldn't expect I would like as much. But Denzel Curry is easily one of the better rappers right now, having some great flow, some great lyricism, and also having a great production in this particular album. It also has a story, a concept to it. It is a 3-part album, and everything is just handled in a very, very good way. Number 84, easily my favorite work by Grimes. It is the album Visions. It is one of those albums that before she would go into the more artsy pop direction of Art Angels, what she did with Visions and some of her previous works that would go more into a sort of dark wave direction with a heavily aesthetic element to them, I preferred these works much more, and Visions for me is her magnum opus. The production might be kind of rough at places, and especially when it comes to the vocals that are just heavy in reverb, but at the end of the day this just adds up to the whole experience, making it a really gratifying and very well done album. Number 83, I have Teardrops by Sittin Side, definitely one of the weirdest projects I have discovered in recent years. And Sittin Side not only have a huge discography, but they play for lots of years. And they're mostly known for having this weird direction of just glitchy sampling combined with elements of avant-garde and krautrock and psychedelic rock, but this album is nothing like that. This is their direction to noise rock and noisecore, and I'll say this is definitely one of the best noisecore projects I've ever heard because it's just so unique, it's so out there, and it comes from a band that doesn't even play noisecore. It is mostly known for some just pure noise rock stuff. But this is so ridiculously distorted. The tracks, the samples, the glitchy part of this thing, it makes it for one of the weirdest albums I've heard, and in a really good way. There is something really compelling about this whole album, this whole short project that goes for about 25 or like 28 minutes long. I don't know, this is a very weird project. It's definitely not for everyone, even for stands of noisecore music. This is extreme on another level. Like if you want your music ridiculously distorted, highly compressed, and just weird samples and structures that make absolutely no sense, this is the album for you. Otherwise, just stay away from it because it is a really bizarre album. But what's even more bizarre than this is Moinai High by the Gero Geri Yeye. I cannot believe that I actually have a Gero Geri Yeye CD. This is my introduction to the band. This is a great comeback album, and I would think to myself that there's no way they would have something weirder than this. And oh boy, was I wrong when I went back to their 80s and 90s catalog. This band is insane and possibly the weirdest act I've ever encountered. Like, what can I say about Moinai High other than this is 4 tracks where nothing makes sense. Every single track is completely different, the one from the next, and it's hard to categorize. Is this like a very noisy, distorted black metal album? Is it like a dark ambient one? Is it like just an avant-garde sound collage? It is so all over the place. It makes no sense, but there's something that makes me come back to it and just feel so immersed by how ridiculous it is and kind of unsettling at times. Yeah, this is not something that you easily find, that you easily get, and this is definitely not for everyone. But if you're into obscure stuff and you've heard some of the previous works from the yeah, definitely look this one up. This is impressive in its own weird way. At number 81, I have one of the most harrowing and one of the most challenging experiences in music I have ever been through, and what I'm talking about is how welcome is death to I, who have nothing more to do but die. This is possibly the most devastating album I can think of that tackles the whole process of death from an individual who just goes through the whole passing of his mother in a really disturbing fashion that I haven't seen other artists portray the way Condom does with this album. There are certainly lots of really stomach turning and heartbreaking albums that tackle the whole process of like death, life, and how we preserve it as individuals, and also revolving around a significant other that we love a lot, like albums from Mount Eerie and Sufjan Stevens. But none of these albums manages to be as disturbing, as disgusting in its whole portrayal of death as this work by Condom, as this is easily the rawest depiction of death, containing recordings of her mother just making some weird sounds and screaming, going into really shocking detail of some of the struggles from his mother when she's in the condition where she can't even wipe herself, which makes it really unsettling to sit through. And sonically, this album is also a nightmare. I really love this album. I really love the way this whole project just processes the whole concept of life and death, but it's definitely a really hard album to sit through. And as far as I would like to recommend this, this is definitely not for everyone, and I wouldn't expect I would get an experience like this in a power electronics album. This is one of a kind experience, for sure. Number 80, Wreckage, Installations and Metal Works by Hal Hudson Stone. What to say about this album? This is a really bizarre experience, and what a birthday gift as well. I didn't know about this album, but it really managed to impress me with its rich sound palettes, its textures, and its whole recording process, since it is very detailed on a subject that I wouldn't even expect I would get so invested, but I really love this. This is basically put into the category of junk metal abuse noise, and the process of it is that it's just an album where you get recordings of like shattering lots of objects like you're in a construction site, and it's just a mess of noise, of steel, metal just getting cramped together. I wouldn't expect that this is something that I would like ever in my life, but it is, and I think it is done in a very good fashion in this industrial chaos and mess that few albums I've seen to cover in a way like this, and this is really impressive. And this is a great album if you're in the mood of just destroying everything in your path. This is like a really aggressive work in its own unique way. Number 79 is Thrice Woven by Wolf's The Throne Room, one of my favorite atmospheric black metal albums to come out in recent years. But this album didn't get the biggest of praise, since for lots of people it was just another Wolves to the Throne Room album that had your basic and typical elements of any other album they've done before. They didn't bring something that much more to their sound. But for me, it made for an album that had all of the elements that made their sound appealing, and perfecting it in this album, making it my favorite work from them so far. Amazing riffs, beautiful dark atmosphere, and a great album from Wolves to the Throne Room. Number 78 is Offal by Sutcliffe Jugend, one of the pioneers in power electronics music, still making some great works after all of these years. And Offal is my favorite one he has done in the past decade, containing just 4 lengthy, massive and really heavy tracks, some of the better works in his entire discography. Number 77 is one of my favorite collab albums to come out in recent years. It is Uniform the Body with Everything That Dies Someday Comes Back. After a sort of disappointing debut collab album, it was still quite promising, but the second one they did over here exceeded all expectations and actually offering one of the best works from both fronts, one of the better works from both Uniform and the Body, making it an impressive experience, really versatile with lots of different sounds of industrial, electronic and metal music, and it's a great album, like a really good one. Number 76, I've got Black Star by David Bowie. Such an impressive final album from one of the most legendary names in music in general, and I could go far enough to say that this is one of the best works he has ever done in his whole career. It is definitely one of the better works he has done for about 20 years or so, or even 30. This album, I wouldn't expect David Bowie to go into such a direction with his sound, but I love how experimental and how just devastating and melancholic it is, while also combining some very nice and refreshing elements of electronic music to his sound. He proves once again with his final album why he's considered one of the most versatile artists ever, and this final album is a further proof of how much of a talent he is in the music industry. Number 75 is an album from a Lithuanian band, if I'm not mistaken. It is Pergale's debut album in 2011, and I can just say that this is definitely one of the most unique albums I've ever heard in extreme music. I've never seen such a combination of sounds and done in this really good way. It is like a combination of mainly depressive black metal, but there is also elements of like post-punk and blues and sort of traditional music. It is really all over the place, but it is done in a great way, making it one of the most exceptional and most versatile albums I've heard in this entire genre. And it also has a bonus track which is a remix of one of the songs in the album, but in sort of an agrotech EBM sound, which is really sick. And yeah, this is an album that I cannot really describe how weird and how out there it is. You have to listen to it for yourselves to see what I'm talking about, but I definitely recommend this to you if you're looking for a more extreme and bizarre album, just fusing lots of different genres together in a really good way. Speaking of another album that fuses lots of genres together, at number 74 I have Who Killed Sgt. Pepper by the Bryant Johnston Massacre. This is an underrated album from the band, since the Bryant Johnston Massacre are mostly known for some psychedelic rock works, which in my opinion they have some decent works, but this one is mainly underrated because it's not like your typical psychedelic rock album. It has elements of electronic music, it has noise rock, it has progressive electronic, it has ambient. It is a weird and obscure album that does not stay in one specific genre. Like almost every one of the tracks is different one from the other, and the more I listen to it, the more I'm just impressed with how consistent it is in its really long runtime and how it just manages to keep your attention for everything it has going on to it. It is a unique experience, especially if you're looking for a rock album of the 2010s. I think this is one of the better ones you can find if you're looking for a kind of weird and bizarre album in the whole rock music scene. Number 73 is Moon of Death and Other Recent Works by Hypnosis. This is an official release from the label Urashima, which is mostly a label which is known for having some represses and reissues of some really classic harsh noise and power electronics works from artists from like cassette tapes of the 80s. But this is one of the very few official releases from the label, which is a very strictly limited edition of only 99 copies. And it's actually one of the better examples of drone music I've found in recent years. It is a dark ambient album, like I would expect something from like Harsh Noise and Harsh Noise Wall, which is the sound the label is mostly known for, but I really dig the dark atmosphere of this album in particular. It's something that I wouldn't expect, but it works very, very well with great production to it, some really great ideas, and a very short album that manages to be highly consistent, combining greatly elements of drone, noise and field recordings with impressive production behind it. Really solid release if you're looking for a dark ambient release. Number 72, Devil is Fine by Zil and Ardor. I really love this album. It is also one of the very unique black metal albums I have discovered. I really dig this combination of black metal music with sort of spiritual slavery blues. It is a really weird album done in a very good fashion. For a lot of people, yeah, Stranger Fruit is a much better, a far more cohesive album. It is far more balanced, but it's for that reason why I much prefer Devil is Fine, their first album, because I just love how all over the place it is, how versatile it is, how unbalanced the whole thing sounds, how raw it was in its mixing. It is a very fun time, and it's a short album with mostly great moments. And yeah, one of the most unique albums I have discovered in black metal, and a really good combination of sounds in this one as well. Number 71 is this incredible collab project of Maurizio Bianchi and Ryan Martin, As Strong as Death Is. This is the vinyl version, which came out like 2 or 3 years later after the initial first release of the album just on cassette. And this is a very good collaboration of Maurizio Bianchi, who is mostly known for being one of the pioneers of Italian power electronics, but this album is more unique. It goes more to like drone and dark ambient music, and this one has some of the best detailed sound collages and soundscapes I've ever heard in an album of this genre. It is very well crafted, it sounds really detailed, really good. I like the atmosphere to it, and in general it is one of my highest recommendations, especially when it comes to some really solid and out there dark ambient projects. Definitely check this one out. Number 70 is Old Star by Dark Throne. This has easily become one of my favorite works from the entire catalog of Dark Throne, and like the best project they have done for about 20 years. Seriously. After all of this time, I find that their combination of black and doom and heavy metal has finally paid off with one of the best works they've done in their entire legendary catalog so far. I love the riffs to this thing, I love the production, and it has become one of the better metal albums I've heard this entire decade. Number 69 is Into Forever by It Lights Become Lights, a highly underrated album that I haven't seen people actually talk about it, but it's one of those albums that I find out of nowhere and they really managed to click with me, and the more I listen to it, the more I enjoy it. This is an instrumental krautrock album, and you know, it has lots of elements that are really reminiscent of like 70s and 80s krautrock music. It doesn't like reinvent the wheel or anything, but out of everything I've heard recently in this sort of genre, this is a really solid album with nice production, some nice performances, and lots of ambient and drone passages that are done really well. I really dig this album. Number 68 is Necrometal's Deathless. It is one of the very few occasions where you see a Japanese idol group like experimenting more into the extreme metal side of things, but you can just say that this is possibly the most experimental idol group out there, since lots of their works, especially their older ones, they would just be so all over the place, having elements of avant-garde metal and black metal and dark wave and post-punk. Deathless is not an exception, but unlike their first album, which was just like an experimentation with weak production and weak performances, the second one just sounds miles better in anything. Like, the production is solid, the performances are solid, the vocals. It's one of the most varied albums you can ever find. It's definitely one of the most varied ones in this list. And for all of those reasons, this is a very solid album that I highly recommend. Number 67 is Oil of Every Pearls and Insides by Sophie. What can I say about this album? Now, this is definitely one of the best produced albums I've ever heard, like ever. The production to this thing is so out there, is so futuristic. It's like this album paves the sound of the future. Like, this album sounds way ahead of its time, and I'm pretty sure that even in like 10 years, we will rarely see albums that would be so groundbreaking and so cutting edge with such detailed production like with this one. Everything from the weird vocal passages and effects to all of the bubblegum pop and post-industrial sounds makes for incredible soundscapes that you rarely see in an electronic album, and Sophie is definitely one of the best examples you can find. Number 66, I have another album from Sittin Side, 54 synth brass, 38 metal guitar, 65 cathedral. Now, remember talking about the Teardrops album, which was a noisecore release. This album has nothing to do with this. This is one of the releases they did in Rocket Recordings, which is a label who is mostly known for experimental rock and psychedelic rock, and this is what you get. This is a very experimental album, once again. It is really more into the avant-garde-ish side of things, and it's just playing with so many samples in a really weird way and with really out there and weird structures, but it has that krautrock, that psychedelic feel. This album is like you're having the worst acid trip ever. It's so just crazy and bizarre, and it ends up being a really impressive album. I highly recommend this, especially if you're looking for a weird album. Like, this is a quite nice, bizarre release. Number 65, another Japanese album, Player by Capsule, and another one which is extremely varied to its sound and really versatile. I mean, almost every single one of the tracks is just a different mood. It has a different sound to it. You have like your anime opening style of track, and then you have tracks that go into a techno direction, others that sound like house. It has elements of pop, elements of rap, and all of them work in a really good way. And even though it has lots of sounds and a huge amount of auto-tune that in other occasions it would just sound corny or cringy, in this particular case with this album from Capsule, they just all sound so on point and so well done. Like, this is something that only with Japanese releases seems to be the case, but hey, once again, yeah, this is a very solid album. Number 64, definitely one of the most underrated and one of the best rap releases I've heard from the past decade. It is Chaos 93 by Ocean Wisdom. The man has some of the best bars ever in the game right now. Like, his whole flow, his style, his delivery is definitely one of the best I've seen in the game in recent years. His rapping is insane, he's quite talented, and I like the whole production to this thing. Even though it is a very long album, it manages for most of the time to be really consistent, and definitely my favorite album from him when it comes to like deliveries, production and sound. It has an old school feel to it, and it is a great UK hip hop album that you don't need to miss, especially if you're a fan of this genre. Number 63 is Poppy.Computer by Poppy, the very first full-length album by Poppy if you count out the 338 ambient release that she had previously, but as far as for a lot of people this was not that much of a special Poppy release, considering how versatile she became and how she went into a completely different direction with her next releases. I still think that this is her best work because it is straight to the point, it is really short, and it is a very enjoyable and colorful pop album. And the thing that I like a lot about this album as well is that it really captures in a very nice and effective way the whole internet culture, the way we get in contact with music nowadays. And I think it is a very sharp, very well done pop album with lots of adorable and very good moments, but also for its short runtime being quite varied and managing to grab your attention. Yeah, this is a very solid pop album. Number 62 is an album that I would never expect it was going to come out, and then when I saw that it would come out, I was really excited. It was one of the releases I was the most excited to hear, and this is Uranos by Stereonova, and it is my favorite Greek band like ever. My biggest introduction to electronic music, some of the pioneers when it comes into the Greek electronic music scene, with some really great sharp lyricism and some incredible instrumentals. Now their work over here, which is their comeback after 21 years, this album is not close to some of the masterpieces they released in the 90s, but it's still a really solid work from the duo. They have done some incredible works in terms of just really sharp and a really nice production of techno and house music, and I like that it's mostly instrumental. One of the better Greek releases coming from one of my favorite bands ever, having one of the most consistent discographies as well. Number 61 is one of my all-time favorite albums in terms of production. It is Savage Sinusoid by Igor. Incredible, mind-blowing production, amazing performances in all fronts, and I love how it combines extreme metal, like death metal music, with all of those elements of breakcore and baroque opera and IDM. This is an impressive album once again from Igor. This is their more metal direction and the first album they signed to Metal Blade Records, even though for lots of people it might not be their favorite one since it doesn't go that much into the breakcore roots. This was definitely a big introduction for lots of people who they didn't know who Igor were, and this is definitely one of the most bizarre things for metalheads to come into, because this is not like a typical sort of death metal release. This is all over the place, and it's done with some of the most detailed and cleanest production I've ever heard in an album of this genre. This is just impressive stuff. At number 60, I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me, but for me, Run the Jewels 3 is by far my favorite Run the Jewels release. I think that this album is just impressive in anything from its very, very good production. This is definitely one of the best produced hip-hop albums I've heard in this decade. The features are excellent, the rapping, the lyrics are all on point, and yeah, out of their trilogy, this is their most solid effort in my opinion, and I'm just looking forward to more because this album, yeah, it was really impressive. Number 59 is Mein Eigentliches Element by Grausame Tochter. For me, this album is one of the nastiest and one of the sexiest things ever made in music form. Yeah, sex can be quite rough and nasty sometimes, and it can be really pleasing for all of those reasons. And in the whole genre of EBM and agrotech music, you see a lot of BDSM related material that have a lot to do with dominance and all of that stuff. And in my opinion, Grausame Tochter is one of the better bands when it comes into just pushing this whole nasty sex appeal, both in music form and with their whole context. From its sexy, dominating, but also very heavy on effects, vocals, which are all in the German language, which makes the things even more sort of sexy, at least for me. But the great thing is that you can't tell it's just a pure EBM agrotech album, as it has lots of different musical elements to it. At other times it can be more smooth, it even has some military snares and even some cello segments. And for all of those reasons, this album is unique in its own way. And as far as Grumble Doctor have lots of great albums in their discography, nothing in my opinion tops their great and very nasty debut. Number 58 is En Garde à Vue by Position Parallel, one of the better dark wave albums I've heard in recent years. It is from the guy behind the Martial industrial group Demiere Volonté, and there are also some other works in the Position Parallel name, but this is by far my favorite one out of everything they have put out. It is a really good album for this genre. I don't have that much to say. It's not like something really unique, but for what it is and what it presents, it's definitely worth checking out. Number 57 is the highly praised Igor by Tyler the Creator. When Tyler the Creator started make some really edgy and aggressive hip hop stuff, no one would actually expect that this is the way he was about to end the decade with his impressive 2019 album, where he goes into a more heartfelt and very well done story in a sort of weird and unique approach of neo soul and R&B music. This is far from a hip hop and rap album. It is easily my favorite work from Tyler the Creator, even though for lots of people it's Flower Boy, but I really love everything about this album, from its well-crafted story to its weird and unique approach on production, which definitely makes it an instant classic. This is an impressive work and I'm looking forward to more from him in the future. Number 56, Belus by Burzum. Burzum is actually one of my favorite artists in the black metal scene. He is really inspirational when it comes to the whole sound and the way he has approached black metal. And this album is the first work he did released out of jail. And I can say that this is possibly the most aggressive work he has done. Like, you can really hear the aggression, and I love how this album, after all of those years, he still stayed in his pure, raw sound. And I still love the riffs to this thing. I love the whole production, the whole sound, how dark it is. And in terms of black metal, this is one of my favorite works from Burzum. Number 55 is one of the greatest experimental rock albums I've heard in the 2010s. It is Come With Boundaries by the ILYs, which are two of the members of Death Grips going into a weird experimental sort of math rock electronic direction with also like elements of hip hop and electronic music. And this album is impressive. It is by far my favorite work out of everything the ILYs have done. Impressive ideas, very weird in its lyricism, and a highly consistent album that has some impressive ideas from start to finish. Number 54 is one of the most disturbing albums I have in this list, and it's 3 by Snuff, the third album from this Finnish power electronics project, which is really disturbing. And this album has lots of elements that shares from the previous albums they've done, but this one is definitely the most varied, and it is the album that grown on me the most for just how weird and how unsettling it is. And it goes from elements of like your pure power electronics to some really bizarre and horrifying field recordings to sound collage, and it makes for one of the better power electronics releases from a band that has a quite consistent discography with some very good works in this genre. It's definitely not for the faint of heart. It's one of the more extreme power electronic stuff you can find, but if you're into this type of genre, this is a release that you don't need to miss. Going into a more light-hearted album now, at number 53 I have Trends by 21 Pilots. Yeah, this has become my favorite work from 21 Pilots, but I don't dislike their previous works. I think that some of the first albums were just okay and decent, but I actually truly like Blurry Face. This album though, Trends, is easily the album that grew on me the most. It is their most cohesive, their most consistent, and their most focused work so far. It sounds way more balanced, and it doesn't have a moment to it that sounds corny. The vocals to it are great, even the rapping is really solid on this album, and it has great production as well. I love the sound of this album, and I also like that it's a driven story album with a very nice but sort of complicated concept, and yeah, I really like this album. Number 52 is one of the greatest comeback albums, Fear Inoculum by Tool. 13 years since their 10,000 Days album, and yeah, for me, it's not my favorite Tool release. I would actually say that this is my least favorite Tool album release, but it's still great enough in order to be that high in this list. I think this album is going to grow even more on me, just like it has happened with pretty much everything from Tool. This is definitely an album that doesn't offer something that much more from what Tool are known for, but I still feel that this sounds like their most silent and their most melancholic work, if you count out some of the very depressing moments of 10,000 Days. But I really like the feel of this album, and with Tool, all of their albums have a one-of-a-kind experience, and I had that experience with their brand new album as well, and yeah, I really love it. Number 51 is one of the most batshit insane albums I've ever heard. It is Space Grind by Pseudocoup, which is one of the greatest and one of the most unique albums when it comes to the whole genre of grindcore, because this is not just your typical grindcore release. Imagine just listening to your favorite 70s prog bands, all of them on acid. And this is what you get with Space Grind. It is actually a sort of a brutal prog album that is really weird but really impressive in its structure. The drums to this thing are absolutely insane, and I like how it's just combined with all of those elements with the guitars and the synths that come out of like a 70s prog album. And it's impressive. I haven't heard something like this before other than this works from Pseudocoup, and their debut in 2010 has become my favorite release from them. It is a really weird but really well done album with some of my favorite works in this sort of genre.